Well, Aaqil Ahmed is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC, and Adrian Mills is a former BBC presenter. Aaqil, great to have you on the programme again. Now we have the Director General and the Chief Executive of BBC News who have resigned. I think, and I wonder what you think, I mean, Jonathan Munro, who's a very senior BBC editor, he wrote the sex and gender guidance that has been criticised in this. Richard Burgess oversaw identity and LGBT coverage, and Stuart Miller has been in charge of digital during a period of major issues. Surely there should be more people who resign as a result of this.
Well, I think we've got to be clear about the resignations that we've seen so far, Peter, and that is basically, you know, Tim Davie says he's stepping down because it's been a difficult job, and the last year or so has taken its toll on him. And I think Deborah, as you said, you know, she has fallen on her sword for the things that she's in charge of, that she takes responsibility. I think that all the things that were in that particular memo have to be investigated, and they will be, and until they're investigated, I don't think it's right for me or anybody really to start calling for people to be sacked without knowing the full details of that investigation. But I agree with you. You know, I think I said this when some of the times we've talked before, which is if when you make mistakes, and this was a mistake, you know, I've been clear about that from day one. This was a mistake, the edit. You have to learn from that mistake. Now, the question mark here is that this was a program made by an independent production company, and I think there's been a breakdown somewhere in the chain of command, as it were.
And we've seen that on a number of occasions with the Gaza documentary, and clearly the right people.
Also made by an independent production company.
Well, exactly, and you know, what's the point of all those highly paid executive producers if they don't know what's happened in the programme making, and if they're not taking responsibility for it? Adrian,
because you have to ask those questions. Are people asking the right questions anymore?
You're absolutely right.
I'm not there to know the answer, but the fact of the matter is, it's interesting that it seems to be happening on a regular occurrence when people may be not asking the right question. That simple question we always used to ask when you first walk into the edit suite: is there something you want to tell me?
Yes.
Is there something that I need to know?
What do you think, I'll come to Adrian Mills in a second, but what do you think about the wisdom or otherwise of the John Simpsons, the Nick Robinsons and the James Landales of this world? James Landale said when the guff it comes and goes, when the guff is over, he put in a tweet. Nick Robinson says there is an attack, a politically motivated attack on the BBC. I mean, two things can be true at the same time, of course, but you realise how this comes across. They perhaps don't realise how this comes across, in that it looks as if criticism, legitimate criticism, I would argue, of the BBC is actually putting up the hackles and being very much making them into a defensive position where they're lashing out. And I just see, you know, John Simpson complaining about criticism of the Israel coverage, for example. Well, I mean, he's entitled to do that, but is today the day to do that? Surely they should just take this on the chin and get on with it, Aaqil.
No, I can't really argue any of that. You're right. Two things can be right, and I think two things are right here. I think there is, in some quarters, a political attack, but ultimately, that's the thing that we need to look at now. A mistake has been made, and you have to hold your hand up, just as Deborah did, and you hold your hand up. Now, the fact of the matter is, you're right. It's not necessarily the time to kind of like try and go out there on the front foot of this. You've got to take, when you've made a mistake, and it's a big one, you basically have to kind of regroup and figure out how you're going to go forward. You learn the lessons from it. You look at what's around you. The bigger picture is the license fee renewal.
Yeah.
The bigger picture is winning back the trust of the DCMS, of all sorts of different people.
Of our viewers and listeners as well, Aaqil. Let me come back to you in a second. Adrian Mills is with us too, former BBC presenter. Adrian, once you lose trust, it's very, very difficult to get it back, isn't it? And Aaqil rightly says that Deborah Turness has fallen on her sword and has taken responsibility for this, but I think there are other people who need to take responsibility too. I also think that it's very, very difficult to say to people, we've changed, when just two people have changed in their positions. Yeah. What do you think, Adrian?
I think when trust and credibility goes out the window, you've got to fight damned hard to bring it back. What I don't understand, and I've worked, as you have, for the BBC and for independent production companies who made programmes for the BBC, were that there were so many checks. The editor, the producer, the deputy producer, then somebody from the BBC would come over and view the finished product. And I find it extraordinary, as you mentioned so articulately when you were talking on the TV the other night, that actually it's incredible that a journalist can take somebody's speech, hack it to pieces, and bear in mind, in that programme, there's some very ominous underlying music as well, which is used to great sort of fear effect, and that they will not be accountable. I would suspect that they won't be getting any more commissions from the BBC, and it is honourable that people have fallen on their swords, but there are others.
The interesting thing I find, Adrian, as well, is when I was a BBC producer, it wouldn't have occurred to me. It just wouldn't have entered my head to do an edit like that, because it's unfair and it's wrong. We don't do them here at Talk. Other broadcasters don't do them because it's a clear breach of journalistic ethics. Yeah. But then the problem is that once that was identified, brought to the board through this ethics report, through this dossier, which is now...
In May, I believe.
Yeah, entirely in the public domain. For months it was suppressed. I mean, Aaqil correctly says that Deborah Turness and Tim Davie have resigned as a result of it, but they've resigned essentially, I'm not taking issue with what Aaqil has said, but they've resigned essentially because they've been found out.
Yes. I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps there's been a little bit of government pressure put on them as well. There's been all sorts of headlines over these last few days. But this is, when Aaqil mentioned that, you learn and you move forward. Well, the problem is, I think, is that people are looking going, the BBC aren't learning anything. Because
that's a very fair point. Let me take that with Aaqil, actually, because, Aaqil, we've had, I actually don't disagree with a single thing you've said today, which is rare, but we're in a situation where the last 3 Directors General have resigned because of editorial failings and BBC News editorial failings. Why do you think that is, Aaqil? Obviously there are individual circumstances in all those cases, but to say this isn't a culture is quite serious for Deborah Turness, and I fundamentally disagree with her on that point.
Yeah, we can have another little conversation about the culture, but I think in terms of this mistake, this was a clear mistake. I mean, a very simple flash between the 2 edits would have been enough. I don't really understand what they were trying to get at. This is a speech which has been seen a lot by a lot of people for the last year or so. So I'm actually quite surprised by what the mistake that they made. Now, in terms of when mistakes were made in the past, and I think Queengate was the one where a lot of changes came in, where we had this all this work around what we call viewer trust. I was at Channel 4 at the time, so across BBC, Channel 4, ITV, everybody, we kind of raised our game a little bit because we understood that there were issues around the trust that viewers had in our output. And I think sometimes you need to keep on, it sounds like a stupid thing to say, but you do need to keep on reminding people. And I think what we need to see now is one of those things that we kind of laugh at, we laugh at the middle management, etc. But you know what? Maybe there isn't enough quality middle management or management anymore, because I'm like, as Adrian said, and as you have said it yourself, I don't understand how this got through the system. I really don't. I can understand a conversation where they may think that they've debated this, but it's quite basic and simple. The President of the United States, you don't do an edit on a...
But it's not just that as well, Aaqil.
You learn your lesson, though, don't you? We learned our lesson in the past. I think people have just forgotten. Actually, I think there's just not enough rigour, as there's too much around you, and there's not enough rigour and basic simple principles.
But you talk about rigour. I agree with what you're saying, Aaqil, but surely it's a management failure as well. You may well point to the fact that Deborah Turness and Tim Davie have gone, and that's fine. Good for them for falling on their sword. Should have happened a long time ago. But the reason they're resigning is because of the public controversy. If they'd simply taken that report and said what Samir Shah has said in a letter today, the chairman of the BBC, Samir Shah, has said in a letter today that every single one of those allegations will be investigated. If they'd simply said that in May, even behind the scenes, this probably wouldn't have made it into the public domain. Changes would have been made.
I agree with you. I'm quite surprised. Well, I know Samir, and I know that I know how busy they have been. Right, that's not an excuse. I think that as busy as you are, if you feel there's an issue about the President of the United States and that actually an edit has been done which is unacceptable, I might have taken that might have gone up a little bit up the food chain.
And they are very, Adrian, they are very, very serious allegations. There are many things within this dossier. I haven't read every word of it, but I looked through it today, and there are many serious allegations about Middle East coverage, about problems with the coverage of trans issues, for example. You would have imagined that this would have set off quite a number of flashing lights in senior BBC management, and they would have said, actually, hold on a second, there's a lot in this, we need to look into this, rather than burying it. Adrian?
Well, I think it is very much a case of burying it and kicking the can down the road in the hope that actually this will all sort of be washed over in months to come and there will be something else that we'll be talking about. But, whatever you're going to say, and this is the problem, is the BBC, highly respected around the world. You mentioned the word BBC, people, oh, wow, their credibility is shot as a result of this. The most powerful man in the world talking about suing the BBC for a vast fortune. I hope we're not seeing the demise of the BBC. I tell you what is very important. Whoever takes this job now has got to do one hell of a job to convince people to pay a licence fee and to continue watching the BBC, because they're on very, very thin ice with this.
Adrian, thank you. That's Adrian Mills there, former BBC presenter. We also heard from Aaqil Ahmed, who is a former head of religion and ethics at the BBC. Thanks to both.